Good morning, Maria. Good morning, classmates. I am Yusil Feti Felnar, and I will be reporting about Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Okay. Um, Sikolohiyang Pilipino is a legacy of Virgilio G. Enriquez. So, what we will discuss for this report is first is the history of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Um, Second topic is what is Sikolohiyang Pilipino? Third is who is Virgilio Enriquez? Fourth is the basic elements and features of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Fifth is the four filiations. Sixth, its major characteristics. Seven, liberated and interdisciplinary psychology. Eight is the development of indigenous concepts and theories. Nine is rethinking Filipino values. 10, indirect communication. 11, internality and externality. And 12, the great cultural divide. So we will start at the history of Psikolohiyang Filipino. So, Virgilio G. Enriquez quoted that the main strategy in discovering, oh, he said that the main strategy in discovering the Philippine psychology is to assess historical and social cultural realities, understand the local language, unravel Filipino characteristics, and explain them through the eyes of a native Filipino. Now, now we go to the history of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Okay. Sikolohiyang Filipino or Filipino psychology refers to the psychology born out of experience, thought, and orientation of the Filipinos. It is based on the full use of Filipino culture and language. The approach is one of indigenization from within, whereby the theoretical framework and methodology emerge from the experiences of the people from the indigenous culture. It is based on assessing historical and social-cultural realities, understanding the local language, unraveling Filipino characteristics, and explaining them through the eyes of the native Filipino. Uh, Among the outcomes are a body of knowledge including indigenous concepts, development of indigenous research methods, and indigenous personality testing, new directions in teaching psychology, and an active participation in organizations among Filipino psychologists and social scientists, both in the Philippines and overseas. Okay. So, in the area of personality, the Western approach in research of not being enmeshed and bound by the culture being studied has resulted in a characterization of the Filipino from the judgmental and impressionistic point of view of the colonizers. The predisposition also to indirectness of Filipino communication was regarded as being dishonest and socially ingratiating and reflecting a deceptive verbal description of reality rather than a concern for the feelings of others. Okay. In the early 1970s, Virgilio Enriquez returned to the Philippines from Northwestern University. Um, he was taking up a PhD in social psychology and he introduced the concept of Sikolohiyang Pilipino together with then chairman of the Department of Psychology at the UP, Dr. Alfredo V. Lagmay. So they both embarked on a research into the historical and cultural roots of Philippine psychology. Now, their research included identifying indigenous concepts and approaches in Philippine psychology and developing creativity and inventiveness among Filipinos. What resulted was a two-volume bibliography on Filipino psychology and a locally developed personality test. Panukat ng ugali at pagkatao were produced. So in 1975, Enriquez chaired the unang pambansang komperensya sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino, or the first national conference on Filipino psychology, which was held at the Abelardo Auditorium at UP. In this conference, the ideas, concepts, and formulations of Sikolohiyang Pilipino were formally articulated. Now, the next topic is, what is Sikolohiyang Pilipino? Sikolohiyang Pilipino is anchored on Filipino thought and experience as understood from a Filipino perspective. The most important aspect of this definition is the Filipino orientation. So Enriquez defined Sikolohiyang Pilipino as the study of diwa, or psyche, which in Filipino directly refers to the wealth of ideas, referred to by the philosophical concept of essence and an entire range of psychological concepts from awareness to motives to behavior. Now, the move towards understanding the particular nature of Filipino psychology. This is what Sikolohiyang Pilipino wants or tries to explore and explain. Filipino psychology is not anti-universal in as much as the ultimate aim of Sikolohiyang Pilipino is to contribute to universal psychology, which can be realized only if each group of people is adequately understood by themselves and from their own perspective. So that is why it is important. Uh, this is the importance of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Okay. Also, cultural revalidation, this the strategy for discovering Sikolohiyang Filipino based on assessing historical and cultural realities, understanding the local language, unraveling Filipino characteristics, and no, no, we've already gone through that. The next is Sikolohiyang Filipino also resulted in a body of knowledge which includes indigenous concepts and methods. In short, a psychology which is appropriate and significant to Filipinos. Its principal emphasis is to foster national identity, consciousness, social involvement, and psychology of language and culture of the Filipinos. It is also concerned with proper applications to health, agriculture, art, mass media, religion, and other spheres of people's daily lives. Okay, so we move on to who is Virgilio G. Enriquez. Virgilio G. Enriquez established the Philippine Psychology Research House, or the PPRH, which later became the Philippine Psychology Research and Training House. Um, it still exists until now. He also uh, authored ano ba to? Pagbabangong Dangal, Indigenous Psychology and Cultural Empowerment. That was produced, you know, okay. Now that was published by Enriquez in 1994. So Enriquez made many outstanding contributions with his Sikolohiyang Pilipino and other researches. And among these awards is he became the outstanding young scientist of the Philippines from the National Academy of Science and Technology in 1982. Now moving on, we will talk about the basic elements and features of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Mm. Enriquez distinguished Sikolohiyang Pilipino from Sikolohiya sa Pilipinas and Sikolohiya ng mga Pilipino. So, Enriquez searched uh, the Filipino culture and history for the basis of Sikolohiyang Pilipino instead of tracing these back to Western theories. So, he really rooted it from our own psychology of the Filipinos and not based on Western theories. He looked beyond the textbook definition of psychology as the study of behavior and thoughts to examine what psychology means for the Filipinos. No. So he went outside the box, no, what what was already established. He dug deeper on what Philippine psychology is all about. Now, the definitions is that emotions and experience knowledge. Now, here are the definitions of Sikolohiyang Filipino. Here are some words, no, that are often used. For example, is the emotions and experience knowledge, which in our understanding means kalooban and kamalayan. Awareness of one's surroundings is kulirat. Information and understanding is isip. Habits and behavior is another meaning of diwa. And the soul is kaluluwa. Okay. Now we go to the fifth topic, the four filiations of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. These are the academic scientific psychology, the academic philosophical psychology, ethnic psychology, and the psychomedical system with religion as cohesive element and explanation. The major characteristics of Psikolohiya Pilipino are the following. These are the philosophical antecedents. First, empirical philosophy, academic scientific psychology, the ideas and teachings of Ricardo Pascual, logical analysis of language. Second is the rational philosophy, the clerical tradition, phenomenology, Thomistic philosophy, and psychology. Third is liberalism, the Philippine propaganda movement, the writings of Philippine heroes, Jacinto Mabini and Del Pilar, and also ethnic psychology. Okay, next. Now, the principal emphasis is on identity and national consciousness, social awareness and involvement, psychology of language, culture, and application, and basis of Filipino psychology in health practices, agriculture, art, mass media, religion, etc. Sikolohiyang Filipino encourages cross-indigenous method, multi-method, multi-language approach, appropriate field methods, total approach, or the triangulation method. It is against a psychology that perpetuates the colonial status of the Filipino mind. Sikolohiyang Pilipino is against a psychology used for the exploitation of the masses. That is really important. It is also against the imposition to a third world country of psychologies developed in industrialized countries. Um, Sikolohiyang Pilipino also endorses the conceptualization of psychological practice in a Philippine context. For example, livelihood psychology instead of industrial psychology, health psychology instead of clinical psychology. It is also concerned with folk practices or indigenous techniques of healing, popular religio-political movements, and community or rural psychology. Um, it is also concerned with both scientific and humanistic approaches, and these are both valid. It develops psychology as a science and psychology as an art, so both. The lesser emphasis on individual experience and with greater emphasis on the collective experience of a people with a common bond of history is one of its major characteristics. So, its greater importance is attached to Kamalayan or our psyche. Thus, subsidiary importance is attached to Ulirat, which is the lower level of our consciousness. Now, methodologically, on the side of analysis, but interprets the result of analysis with a bias for wholeness. So, now another characteristic of Sikolohiyang Filipino me- is the methodology on the side of analysis, but which interprets the result as a whole. It is not inconsistent with a universal psychology, but is actually a step towards the development of a universal psychology. It is also not anti Western theory and methods, but it is against a non selective use of imposition of Western knowledge. Of course, if the Western knowledge is not applicable to the Philippines or the Filipinos, then it should not be applied to us, no? Okay. Topic 7, a liberated and interdisciplinary psychology. Now, what does this mean? Sikolohiyang Pilipino eliminated its bondage to the Western perspective, not only in theory and method, but in practice. In place of clinical psychology and industrial psychology, um, Virgilio, he brought in health psychology, livelihood psychology, rural psychology, psychology of the arts, and others. Sikolohiyang Filipino also became interdisciplinary, which means it is enriched by the different disciplines to become more solid and closer to Philippine reality. Yes. Okay. Now we go to the development of indigenous concepts and theories. Using language interpreters and without really immersing themselves in the culture of the people, these foreign experts have published their versions of Filipino values. No, how could they? It does not really represent the Filipinos. Um, it does not represent our psychology as Filipinos. Now, these Filipino values, together with other colonial interpretations offered by the foreign scholars, have been transmitted from one generation to another, thus perpetuating a distorted, if not false, picture of the Filipino. So, That is the downside when you apply a study of the Western culture into our culture. So, topic 9, rethinking Filipino values. Here are some words that is most often used in Sikolohiyang Pilipino. First is bahala na or the determination and risk-taking. Hiya is the sense of propriety, utang na loob, gratitude or solidarity. Pakikisama is companionship or esteem. Sama or lakas ng loob is resentment or guts. Pakikibaka is resistance. Kapwa is shared identity. Pakiramdam is shared inner perception. Kagandahang loob is shared humanity. Karangalan, dignity. Katarungan, justice. Kalayaan is freedom. Good. Now, why is it important to define these things, these words, according to our culture? That is because most words uh, in English have different meaning um, in the Western culture as compared to our own definition as Filipinos. Okay. Now, topic 10, indirect communication. Um, Now we have this word pakikiramdam, which is feeling for another. Okay. Um, in the Western culture, uh this is what it means. Result Pakikiramdam resulted in indirectness or euphemisms in verbal exchange, expressive body language, voice intonations that say more than the words themselves and other similar behaviors. So, kind of indirectness, delete straight to the point because um we might we might offend somebody. So we're being careful with what we say. So for us, to the Filipinos, to us Filipinos, we are being frank about our feelings, but we do not express it verbally. Okay. Um, we go to internality and externality. Now, here are another ano, words often used. Na honor is puri and dangal. Now, puri refers to honor which is physical, such as that bestowed through compliments or applauses for a good performance. Thus, external, it also referred to virginity, which is a virtue expected of unmarried Filipino women. So, this puri is external. Now, dangal, which is also a what is that translation of honor, is honor from within. Dangal is honor from within. It is the knowledge of one's true worth, character, achievement, and success. It can be acknowledged through an award or a tribute, parangal, which is actually padangal. But even without such gestures from outside, it is within you. So, um, honor has both puri and dangal translation, which has but these words have different meanings. Puri is external and dangal is within us, which is internal. Next is the great cultural, this is the last topic, I think. The great cultural divide On one side of the cultural divide are Filipinos who have maintained a more mass oriented worldview, culture, and way of life. On the other side of the cultural divide are the Filipinos who adhered to a more elitist viewpoint. They go to performances in cultural centers and theaters. They look down on people on the other side of the divide. Okay. The question and answer is in our Google link. Um, some questions, all the questions that have been posted were already answered. Some did not submit their questions yet, so we will check it by tomorrow. Our reference is the Asian Journal of Social Psychology and yeah. So thank you all for listening, and that ends my report. Thank you, guys.